Tonight, I'm joined with English professor at Hofstra University in New York and author of Trauma and the Discourse of Climate Change, Lee Zimmerman. We sit down for a one-on-one conversation about the climate crisis, politics, and the fascinatingly complex theme of reality through the lens of Don DeLillo's novel, White Noise. Zimmerman describes the increase of greenhouse emissions as the house burning down, the house being our planet Earth. He argues that we are in a demented state of affairs, normalized partly by the way we don't talk about it. The it in question is the house that is ablaze due to our negligence. Why and how are we blinded to such a destruction? Well, that is where white noise comes into play. White noise, according to Zimmerman, serves a poignant metaphor for how humans can become blinded by the enormity of climate change, failing to recognize the urgency and gravity of the situation until it's too late. Just as we need to filter through the white noise to hear individual sounds clearly, we must cut through the distractions and misinformation to address the existential threat of climate change before it becomes irreversible. Here with me now, Lee Zimmerman.
You're listening to Talks hosted by Fawaz. As an international journalist, join Fawaz as he takes on tough topics, even tougher guests, and everything lifestyle. And now, welcome to Talks hosted by Fawaz.
So I had an interesting talk with an old professor of mine, Lee Zimmerman, and he's always been a very significant part throughout my time in university because when I first met him, I'd signed up for a class that was about American literature. I was taking a minor in English language. What was interesting was that when you go into his class, a class quite literally titled American Literature, you don't think any much more of it. I now knew, okay, this is a hefty class. It challenges your thought process, which for me is what college life is all about. If you're not being challenged intellectually, then what's the point? And I haven't had a class like that in a while. To simplify it, it challenged us on what is reality. It challenged the current issue, global issue of global warming and how much longer we have on this earth. And white noise is a perfect example that perhaps encapsulates all of the points that I brought up just now. But even then, it was still difficult for me to put into words what I thought. And I remember Lee Zimmerman was very engaging, and I remember we sat in a circle. He promoted class discussions, and the discussions were very much interesting. I thought I was debating, not just discussing, because a discussion can be quite shallow, but a debate is a lot more deep because every person in that class had their own thoughts, had their own opinions. Now, the purpose of my sit-down with Lee Zimmerman might be the purpose of an interview. However, I truly was still in question about a lot of the things that we had read and that we had learned. Therefore, I was generally intrigued and generally willing to learn a lot more. And so I sat there and I was listening and taking notes and learning at the same time. Now, you may notice there was not a lot of talking on my end because I was truly sitting there and listening as if I was his student all over again. I was generally intrigued. I was willing to learn. I was taking notes, both physical notes and mental notes, all at the same time. Now, I do like to apologize for a little bit of an audio glitch throughout the beginning of the interview. This interview was conducted at Hofstra University back when I was a student there, and there were some unexpected glitches that happened throughout the beginning of the interview, so I do ask that you excuse them. Well, my sit-down with Lee Zimmerman begins. All right, so I'm here with Professor Lee Zimmerman. How are you, Professor?
Good. How you doing?
All good.
All right.
All right, so I want to jump right in.
Head first or?
Let's do head first.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Seems more promising.
All right.
I recall now, I took your class exactly a year ago from now.
Mm-hmm.
And at the beginning of every class, you had a question you would ask everyone as you called the names.
Like a roll question.
Yeah.
People.
And I would assume it was your way of kind of breaking the ice and getting to know your students a lot more.
And to have the students have a sense of each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for students to actually, everyone says something, so it becomes a little easier to talk later on.
Right.
So all those reasons.
Right.
Plus it's just sheer sport and fun.
Of course, yeah. And it's a very good way to start, and which is why, since I have the floor now,
okay,
we have a swapping of a power dynamic now.
Revenge.
So I am here to ask you.
Okay, right.
My question for you is, what was the film specifically that introduced this idea of societal simulation, this perfectionist world? What was the film that, kind of was the light bulb moment for you?
I don't know that I can trace the dawning of that, or if it even had to do with the film per se rather than a book or what have you. But but I can say that what crystallizes it for me now is the book White Noise.
Right.
That seems to be the fullest articulation of the kind
of your thoughts.
Yeah, well, of the kind of thing that you've been just alluding to. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How did you come across White Noise? Because had it not been for you, I wouldn't imagine I would have come across it.
Well, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
What books do you come across and which books don't you come across?
Exactly.
And why?
Yeah.
That's a question.
That's
to
true.
Ponder. Well, I was alive when it came out, and he was sort of a cool author at the time. And I think one of my professors had alluded to it and said it was good.
Really?
Yeah. And then I read it, and I thought, that's a cool book. But then I reread it when I was thinking about books to teach. And in the reading of it, in the context of the course, that's when I went, holy, good God. This is happening, right?
It's something.
Yeah.
So would you say after reading White Noise, your thoughts on the subject of the book amplified, or were they amplified prior to reading White Noise?
It's hard to parse that out. Certainly White Noise gave me a kind of language for it, which is one of the things that art does. It can give a language for something that you can't put in a logarithm or an algorithm or so it certainly gave me a language to
build on.
To point to.
Right. So
and to engage others with.
Did you see or watch the White Noise film? I believe there's a new adaptation of it with Adam Driver, I believe.
Yeah.
Did you watch it?
Right. Well, I felt a kind of professional responsibility to it, I suppose, in anticipation of just this moment.
Yeah.
Because I knew I would be asked about it a lot, having taught the book a lot.
Yeah.
I did. Yes, I'm answering your question. I saw it. Yes.
And what do you think?
Well, I thought it might be awful. I thought it might just be a disaster. And it wasn't. I think on its own terms, it was an interesting film. I don't know that the film really does what the book does. There's many questions to ask of an adaptation, only one of which is, does it do something like the book does? There are other questions to ask about an adaptation. So I wouldn't say it does what the book does.
Of course. Yeah. Since we're on the topic of White Noise, ever since I took your class, now there are very rare professors and classes that I actually bring into my personal life in a reoccurring manner.
And that's too bad. That's too bad.
Yeah, well, let me say, your class was one of those classes that actually came along with me in my personal life, and I brought up white noise, and specifically your ideas about the tipping chair, if you recall, how we're all kind of tipping backwards, and at some point we're going to fall back.
Yeah, that's in relation to climate.
Yes. Yeah. So I would bring those up, and I don't know, tell me if you've ever had that sort of description about your ideas, because when I was talking about it, people said, those ideas you just said, oh, that's so eccentric. That is so eccentric. You are reaching too far. Have you ever been called, or have your ideas ever been called, reaching too far? You're
Moi?
over analyzing.
By my ideas, do you mean the tipping chair?
Well, more so on white noise, and
Right.
and this utopian world that we have built around us. More so on that topic.
So I wouldn't call it a utopian world. I'd say in white noise, I see it as a critique of a world where representation or in images or signs are fantasized as having replaced the real things.
Yeah.
So that images, words become the quote-unquote reality, which is a way of course, denying and repressing and obscuring the kind of actual reality. Has that idea been called extreme? Yes.
What about eccentric? See, people told me I was eccentric. Oh, you're reaching.
Yeah, and what did they mean by eccentric? I mean, in a way, it is eccentric since it's not at the center.
Yeah.
And that's the point.
Yeah, that's actually a very good
questioning
point.
It's questioning the what is the center.
There you go, yeah.
But if you think about eccentric, it means away from the center.
Yeah, which is the whole point.
And the whole point is what defines the center, who defines the center, what passes for normal at the center. I'm thinking in terms of the tipping chair, for instance. There are many people who think that when it comes, the tipping chair has to do with climate change and the idea that we're approaching a point at which the climate system will tip, so to speak, and will relatively rapidly turn into some other system much less amenable for human beings than anything like our 8 billion number. Which, in other words, the death of billions of people.
Right.
Kind of bad, and that we're approaching that. If you can say the house is burning down, and we're putting fuel on the fire. We continue to burn fossil fuel because our economy depends upon it. The whole idea of growth, economic growth, depends upon it. Now, here's an eccentric idea. You can't grow an economy forever on a planet with finite resources. That's an eccentric idea. Now, it may sound like common sense phrased that way, but if you question the goodness of economic growth in our culture, that's crazy talk. Well, I mean, I walk around campus, I see the green light on the arrows on the stock exchange boards. You've seen them,
Yeah.
Up, more activity is good. Price goes up. Good economic news. The economy expanded by blah. Well, to call that into question is eccentric because it's questioning the central premise of what we define as the good, or
You're going against the status quo.
Kind of, yeah. But in a way, yeah.
Isn't that, white noise in itself? Would you say?
I think I would. Tell me what you mean a little bit.
So when everyone is watching those boards, going up, green lights, as you said, and you're kind of engulfed with the idea of, good economy, money coming in.
Right.
Wouldn't you say you're kind of phased out from everything else? Let's say climate change again. If your focus is the economy,
correct.
In many ways, you're going to be against climate control.
You're going to be against the rapid phasing down of fossil fuel at about
Yeah.
8% a year,
Yeah.
which is what has to be done if we're not going to, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I would say that's white noise. There's crucial scenes in white noise where it takes place in the supermarket. And, as we read those scenes, what's at stake in those scenes is we have these products in the supermarket, and they're, in what Murray calls, they're like in a timeless zone. They exist outside of time, like in an insulated, isolated space. The point is that they're disconnected. They're utterly severed from the whole context of how they got there. The whole history of their production, what's at stake in their production,
Right.
environmentally, in terms of labor. Like you see the can of coffee on the, what degree of exploitation goes into the, et cetera, the growing,
Yeah.
and what are the energy needs, what kind of energy is it, what's the carbon footprint of that production?
Right.
I think I brought into our class this bit of a Coleridge speech when he wrote about, he was giving a speech about the slave trade in England, and about 1800, and he said, I'm paraphrasing, of course, that we don't really care about the bad stuff that we can't see. We only care about the stuff that's in front of our eyes.
Yeah.
As long as the dunghill be not in front of our window, we're well content to know that it exists. And then he says, we can attribute the slave trade to this. The merchant finds no argument against it in his ledger, because the slave trade is good for his ledger. The refined lady, when she's reading her novels, sips a beverage sweetened with human blood. The sugar that's
Yeah.
in the tea grown on plantations,
Right.
slave plantations.
And there's vast history. One spoonful of sugar,
Right. We have our sugar, or whatever the equivalent is, maybe sugar too, but whatever, or cotton,
Yeah.
Our phones, whatever.
The clothes on our back.
Right.
Yeah.
They become products isolated, decontextualized from their history, as if they're just free floating.
Right.
Now
right.
that's something like what we can call white noise, as if they're not connected to a material reality.
It was interesting you brought up the grocery store
Yeah.
scene,
Yeah.
because at the same semester I was taking your class, I was taking a food studies class,
Oh, wow.
and we spoke about the degrees and levels of human exploitation for these products that we use on a daily basis. So I was actually thinking about that, during our class,
Mhm.
when we got to that scene.
Mhm.
So it's very interesting you brought it up now, because
Mhm.
there's a really strong correlation between the two. But again, in white noise fashion,
Mhm.
we're not meant to see beyond the product.
Can I ask, by the way,
Yes.
who is a teacher of the food studies?
Sharon Casimir.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm doing a team teaching thing with her, and some other people with her next semester on food
Right.
studies.
There you go.
In the honors college.
Yeah, there you go.
This is a plug. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Another class.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is more recent. This is this semester. I'm
Okay.
taking a political science foreign policy class.
Oy.
But it still comes back to your class. Now, you see what I mean? Some classes you take,
Mhm.
they're just with you wherever you go.
Right.
And your class was that for me. So, here I am in foreign policy.
Right. Why shouldn't every class be that way?
We'll be right back with our discussion with Lee Zimmerman. Don't go anywhere. We're back with Lee Zimmerman. This was actually only yesterday, and
Yeah.
we talked about Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
My ideas about, Ronald Reagan's perfectionist
Mm-hmm.
ideas about America. Are you aware of his quote that goes, "The shining city upon a hill"?
Yeah, that's an old quote.
Yeah.
That's a Puritan notion, I think. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
When it comes to that
Mm-hmm.
day and age in America, and
You,
again,
you mean the 80s or
yes,
Reagan
yes.
80s? Yeah. Uh-huh.
Reagan's America, we should say.
Right.
How would you say that in his world a white noise was sort of created? Would you say that's an accurate assessment, or do you think these are two separate events that ought not to be compared?
No, very much. They're very connected. In fact, The White Noise is very much an 80s book.
Yeah.
I would actually think about White Noise as a species of critique of Reaganism, of Reaganist ideology. Well, let's think about Reagan for a second. You have an actor who's a president.
People tend to forget that sometimes.
Right. He would notoriously make claims about history which came from movies and weren't actually coming from,
Interesting.
history. As in other words, that the movie was the real.
Right.
Right. He was known as, I don't know if you've heard this, the Teflon president.
I have not heard that.
Okay, I don't know if Teflon is even
Teflon.
a thing anymore, right?
What
But
is
it's-
that? Enlighten us, please.
Yeah, right. It was some kind of chemical that they put on pans, maybe they still do, I don't know, that made things not stick.
Oh, so basically non-stick pans.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
they probably do that still.
I'm sure they do. I don't know if it's called Teflon anymore or not, but he was called the Teflon president.
Right.
The idea that, no matter what he said, it wouldn't, or what he did, nothing mattered, it didn't stick. It was like that Tupperware that we talked about.
Yeah.
So the idea that with Reagan, the image of the president became what was important. I mean, that was always true to an extent. But with Reagan, there was actually no longer, it wasn't even the pretense of thought or intelligence or So, and of course, that was, the beginning of, I don't know if it was the beginning, but it was certainly connected to the concentration, which you probably know about, the concentration of the media business.
Right.
Where fewer and fewer companies owning more and controlling more and more of the media, so that news became absorbed into entertainment. So everything had to become entertainment if it was going to become real.
Would you say Donald Trump is an extension of that, started by Reagan?
Yeah, I mean, I think to some degree every president since Reagan has been an extension of that.
Right.
I mean, Trump perhaps most spectacularly, but you could think about Bush, who could say lies and it wouldn't make any difference. You could think about Obama, who claimed that it was legal to kill American citizens if he said they were terrorists without any due process, and did. Yeah, Karl Rove, who was Bush's chief of staff or whatever he was, he scolded journalists at one point, saying, "You people are still stuck in reality. You don't understand that we make up our own reality. We make up the reality."
Interesting.
Well, we can laugh at it, but
it's not fully a lie.
No, I think it's what version of reality passes for common sense or seems true, or I mean, what is it? How many percentage of Americans still think Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11? Et cetera.
Since you talk about the Tupperware and the reality we make, I'm going to steer to you can say somewhat of a lighter note. Disneyland.
Yeah.
Las Vegas.
That is not a lighter note.
Fabulous Las Vegas.
That's not a lighter note. Yeah.
I know.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I did not expect to hear what I was about to hear when I walked into that class. I was actually very defensive when you talked about Disneyland and you said how it's this false fantasy land that we forget that it's a made-up world.
It's a thing being sold to you. So
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
You were really truthful in the sense that people go into Disneyland in this Tupperware form, they're kind of blocked in the way Disneyland is designed as well. It's kind of to seclude you from the outside world. Do you think Disneyland and Disney films should be a reflection of reality, or can they be fantasy?
Disney is not in the business of encouraging fantasy. That's not why Disney exists. Disney exists, by definition, maximize their capital, increase capital.
Sales.
Profit.
Essentially.
Profit. Yeah. Everything Disney does is geared to is produced as a commodity. That's the point.
Mm-hmm.
As a commodity to sell.
So in order to sell, you have to reflect reality, you would say.
I didn't say that. You can manufacture desire.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do people want? What they want? What do they know? I mean, had you been aware of white noise before you happened to cross it in a college classroom?
Right.
Or, is there a movie playing in America beside Barbie and
Oppenheimer?
Oppenheimer?
Yeah.
I don't know. So one thing is Disney doesn't exist to encourage fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm all in favor of, fantasy and creativity, but that's not what Disney is about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that may have how they sell themselves, The other thing is there's only about, 5 or 6 media companies that control so much of what the images and the words that that come across that we see.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can always go looking around for independent media and stuff, and but for the most part, without trying, Disney has such a Disney-esque entities have a colonizing effect on the whole public sphere. They define what's there, how things can be said, how things can be apprehended. So it's not about having a place for fun or fantasy. That's not what Disney is about.
Right.
I don't know. Are there current Disney movies that you would want to defend on this score?
No, I'm really not a fan of the direction that Disney is going.
Yeah. Has things changed that much since Mary Poppins? And the reason I bring up Mary Poppins is because of the chimney sweeps. And we know from Mary Poppins, which is how probably most people know what chimney sweeps are, is that they're very happy. Chim, chimney, chim, chimney, chim, chim. Good luck. A sweep is as lucky can be. And they're tall, good-looking, great dancers.
Mm-hmm.
They look a lot like fit Broadway dancers, in fact. Now, if you look at what chimney sweeps were in that era, Victorian era, they were children who were shoved up, orphans mostly, or poor children who were shoved up chimneys to breathe soot, and sometimes they suffocated and got burned, and it was child torture.
Back then, Disney was its own thing,
Mm-hmm.
us as kids watching, it was sort of an escape,
Right.
because we know Disney is not a reflection of our real world. It's it's not going to happen. We're not going to have a talking bear in the middle of the jungle. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
But now, maybe
I see. They're trying to.
push that,
They're working in a more "quote unquote" realistic mode.
exactly. But it
by
doesn't
representing. Are we replacing dwarves with fairies?
with fairies, and it doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
We know that princesses can't fly. We know that creatures, mermaids don't exist, and
Yeah.
XYZ. So that's the direction that Disney is taking.
Depends what you mean by, again, reality.
Right. Who was to say?
I mean, what part of reality do they try to focus on? How do they frame that? What that reality is? I'm thinking of a film called The Day After Tomorrow, I think it is. It was a so-called global warming film about what would happen to New York. That's what that was called, right? Yeah.
Jake Gyllenhaal. My God, I watched that as a kid.
Yeah.
I wasn't supposed to.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the film depicts catastrophic climate effects
Right.
following the disruption of the North Atlantic circulation. So, okay, so I've been recently listening to a lecture about that. They call it the Atlantic Meridian overturning circulation or something. It's amok. And it has to do with the disruption of the
warm weather.
ocean. Disruption of the currents that do other things.
Yeah.
Among other things, they bring warm water from the equator up of the melting polar ice, which is making the water fresh, and it's stopping the circulation.
Right.
Okay. The point is that it's one of the very dangerous tipping points in the climate system that could be utterly disruptive, and so I've been listening to some lectures about it, and he mentioned that I think he was a consultant, one of the scientists who was doing this work on this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And he pointed out that the effects that were shown were not what would happen.
Mm.
And the director or the producer, whoever it was, said...
Of the film.
Yes.
Yeah.
Said, well, look, if I were making a movie for 1 million people, I would follow the laws of science.
Mm.
But I'm making a movie for 100 million people, so I follow the laws of Hollywood.
Of Hollywood, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Now, the laws of Hollywood
much different
are the powerful laws.
Mm.
And notice those are, what are the laws of Hollywood? Whatever they think will sell the most, and blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
Notice that the laws of science or physics or reality or physical reality don't have much standing in relationship to the economic laws.
Right.
Now, that's the story, of course, why we're in a burning down house and keep on throwing fuel on the on the fire.
Interesting.
But to not throw fuel on the fire is considered eccentric.
There we go. We brought it full circle. I always wanted to ask you this. I brought it up in class once, but you promised that you'd come back to me, but you never did.
Oh, sorry.
1 year later, here we are.
So this is the revenge tour.
Well,
okay,
yeah. Maybe.
All right.
So I
I'm sorry. Our time is up. Okay.
Oh, all right. Well, never mind. I'll wait another year.
Yeah, okay.
The Stepford Wives.
Yeah.
I've brought it up to you before, and I said, it's one of my favorite films. I'm talking about the older version, not the one with Nicole Kidman.
Okay.
Now I'm a campy guy. I love campy films.
Mm-hmm.
So of course it's not serious in the sense of the Tupperware that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
But I always felt like that the Stepford Wives, in many ways, was kind of projecting that same idea that white noise does. I mean, you are familiar with the film, right?
I remember it, and I know what it's about, and I don't remember if I've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember how it resolves.
Well, it's
Yeah.
it's about this
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, I know. And the
perfect
wives are
housewife.
all like robots or something.
Yeah,
Or, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, in many ways, it is silly, but
Well,
if you look at
yeah,
the underlying tones
sure.
of the storyline, wouldn't you say that films like that are a better way of pushing white noise? Because upon my
Mm-hmm.
research by asking other people,
Mm-hmm.
white noise is just too one note.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it is the whole point. It's
Right.
very quiet. It feels like
Right.
talk about white noise. What a
Right.
contradiction.
Right.
But would you say films like The Stepford Wives would be a better way of informing people in a more entertainment value? Or do you think it just needs to be, straight up white noise?
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to sugarcoat it. We're not going to,
Mm-hmm.
as you said, we're not going to give it the laws of Hollywood,
Right.
What say you?
Well, I wouldn't dismiss film as a medium by which a critique of a homogenized, denialistic society
Mm-hmm.
can happen. Whether or not such a film can come out of, Hollywood, I'm dubious.
Right.
You had mentioned to me earlier the Truman Show,
Yeah.
and I was
Yeah,
thinking about that, and I looked at the ending again, and so on the one hand, it's a triumph because he breaks out of the simulated world,
Right.
but that's staged as a great triumph, and everybody is watching on TV and cheering. It's still about watching TV,
Yeah,
and it's
right.
it's the TV that's bringing and they show different people in different walks of life, and old people and young people in the bars and in the private home, and
Yeah.
and it's like it's the community is sitting there watching a TV in a movie that purports to critique. So plus, in that movie, the simulation it's defined as a simulation. It's not claiming to be real.
Yeah.
Versus the world of white noise, in which the simulation is the primary thing,
Right.
Or is imagined to be, thought to be the primary. So I may have, once again, sidestepped your question about Stepford Wives. I'm not sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
in many ways, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
It could be totally different. But I also kind of equate the book 1984,
Mm-hmm.
sort of,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not exactly white noise-esque.
No, I understand. Yeah.
But
yeah.
and again, it's all related to the 80s. So I wonder, why was there this trend in the 80s where everyone was head over heels over simulations, and what if we're all not real, or if we're being watched?
Right. Well, something was happening in the 80s, and I think that's a complicated question, a large historical shift. To me, the rise of Reagan and Reaganism is a kind of way of shorthanding that.
Yeah.
Where and why did that happen in the 80s? I don't know. That's a question I can answer in the last few minutes of a radio show.
Yeah. Who's to say?
Well, no, I don't think that's not an answerable or addressable question. I think it has to do with deep currents in the economy and what was happening with the economy, the aftermath of the Vietnam War.
A lot of factors.
Complicated.
Yeah.
Right. But I think it did. I mean, we can.
You can dissect it even more.
But I think the 80s was a pivotal
shift.
Decade in the increasing colonization of reality by simulation. As you know, I'm pretty focused on climate now.
Yeah.
And I think, because I say the house is burning down, or our hair's on fire, and almost everything doesn't say that.
Yeah.
Almost everything in the media, if the house is burning down, shouldn't that be what's
on?
So the media is normalizing things.
Yeah.
So it's very hard for me to look at contemporary media, which I think is very implicated in the business as usual,
Yeah.
by which we remain oblivious to the house burning down. Even when we talk about the house burning down, we talk about it in terms that makes it a political issue or a scientific issue or a technological issue. We don't actually look at what it has to do with our central modes of being.
There you go. Maybe social media is the new Tupperware.
I can't claim to be too much of an expert,
Right.
but it is true. I do know that it tends to, students have told me that it shortens their attention spans.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, yeah.
Now, there's a lot at stake in a shorter versus longer attention span. You can't actually begin to talk back
Right.
or critique or slow down and notice or pay attention. So you
Right.
just slide along.
Yeah.
I need to learn more about what's happening but people spend a lot of time on it. And I've heard people talk about, if it, they're creating their lives to be on the social media, and that, if they don't want to, because they don't want to miss anything, as if where things are really happening
Right.
is in the simulation of the media, which is, but you can probably tell me more about that.
You can take my word for it.
Yeah.
Yes. As someone who is in the social media world, unfortunately, that's what's happening. But I'm always trying to push, more. Let's have more depth. Let's elongate our now shortened attention span. It really gets me.
That's called reading.
Yes.
But as you put it, who can sit down and read a book? There's a scene in this book called Weather.
Yes.
By Jenny Offel, where this young techno-optimist says he's looking forward to the day when people who didn't grow up with the contemporary media will age out of the conversation, by which he seems to mean die.
Yeah.
So that then people will just take it for granted, and people won't worry about what we're losing.
Right.
That people won't remember that there was a thing before this media. And that's a good thing in his terms, because then we become more progressive. We can make progress, and everything can be smart, like smart houses and smartphones and smartwatches. And notice what the word smart means in that context.
On that note, thank you so much,
Okay,
Professor Lee Zimmerman. It was great having you. Great talk.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Talks, hosted by Fawaz. Until next time.